in the early days of the Royal Society, the experiment used to be very much a focal point of appreciation for aesthetic reasons. So it will have audiences where people engage with the experiment and appreciate it, and often appreciate nature as it's revealed to them. And this painting is brilliant because it shows us how many different ways people appreciated aesthetically the experiment, from awe and fascination to even fear, and all of the kind of the diversity of aesthetic responses that would have to the fact that this bird is going to die because we're extracting the oxygen from the cylinder. So the performance is aesthetically appreciated here, and the experiment is like an artist in the middle of the painting. But what I have argued in some of my work recently is that these features are kind of like a nice bonus to have, right? So they're visual features that are very kind of easily perceivable to us, but they're not necessarily sufficient to make an experiment aesthetically valuable or to make it beautiful. We're going to talk more about beauty today. What really matters is this very special relationship between how the design delivers a result and the kind of imagination and creativity, ingenuity that is involved in conceiving such an experimental design. So let me illustrate this a little bit more. In one of these famous experiments, Foucault's Pendulum, we see this really well illustrated. It was an experiment that clearly had some very visually pleasing features. It was basically a brass ball that was hung from a rope in Paris's Pantheon, and people would go to see it. As you can see here, there was always an audience admiring it, beautiful pendulum swinging around. But what's beautiful about this experiment has nothing to do with that. I mean, okay, very nice that we can see something visually pleasing, but what is really ingenious about it is how simple the experimental design is for the purpose that it had and the significance that it had. The significance is really important. This experiment with this very simple setup shows something very previously disputed, and that was that the Earth rotates around its axis. And the experiment delivered that by simply showing that after some time of this pendulum swinging, the sand underneath, the lines that the ball had made, were not aligned with each other. So really important results delivered by a very elegant, very simple design. And this is what I think makes this experiment beautiful. The visual features are kind of secondary to this much more substantial beauty that we find in how the results are delivered by a very, very good design for purpose. Similarly, in biology, we celebrate the Meselson-Stahl experiment because it delivered important results to a really, really important question, and it delivered them in a really ingenious way. So this experiment has received the title of the most beautiful experiment in biology for good reason. As historian Hans-Peter Fischer has argued, there was something really ingenious about how the experimental design was basically set up. Beautiful idea to use basically the method of centrifugation, to use density to study the genetic material through the generations as they did in order to determine how it changed. And there was some simplicity, as historian Frederick Holmes argues, in this setup, in the steps that they followed. So simple, elegant design, but the results that the experiment delivered were also incredibly significant. James Watson, one of the discoverers of the double helix structure of DNA, argued that this experiment was ingenious because it gave a simple answer to a question. We treat this experiment as an example of a crucial experiment in science because it delivers these really important, straightforward, easy results. Right? It's not a messy result. It's really quite clear, speaking in favor of one of the three contenders at the time of how DNA would replicate. Semi-conservatively, the answer was. And Peter Fischer argues against that the experimental results just spoke for themselves. There was no need to replicate them. No further commentary was necessary. And Holmes argued that there was this immediateness about them, that there was a singular historic event. We didn't have to worry to redo these experiments many times. Of course, recognizing that that's quite unusual, but that was one of the aspects that was really valued about how the experiment delivered its results. And what's worthwhile noting here is that so far we have these two experiments as examples of beautiful experiments that clearly delivered an answer to a question and delivered an answer to a question that aligns with expectation. Right, in the first case, we have a demonstration of a phenomenon that was expected. And here we had the selection of a hypothesis among three contenders at the time, aligning against the expectation. Sometimes things don't go like that, though. In science, we have sometimes experimental results that will not align with expectations. So the question is, what happens there? Are they then making the experiment aesthetically disvalued? We can think about the Michelson-Morley experiment as an example of something like this, and how it has been praised by scientists as a very beautiful experiment. Albert Einstein himself argued that Michelson was an artist in science, the artist in science, right? Really highly praised for his aesthetic sensibility, who took great pleasure and great joy in the beauty of the experimental setup and the elegance of the method that he employed. And historian Gerald Houghton argued again about the ingenuity of just setting up the experiment and building the instruments necessary to achieve the goal of the experiment. Nobody before Michelson was able to imagine and construct an apparatus to measure the second-order effects of the presumed ether drift. He argues that the interferometer was a lovely thing. So what happens in these cases where we have results that don't necessarily align quite with expectation, but are really well set up for purpose? I think we should understand them still as beautiful, but understand the nature of significance in a slightly different way. So by significance of results, we can think about them as going our way when we have a demonstration of a phenomenon or confirmation of discovery. But also sometimes we have these disruptive results that are really productive. Not every null result will be like that. But sometimes, like in this case with the ether, not detecting the ether, actually was what was significant and what was really good about this result, this experiment. And so I've argued that we should really think about this kind of productive disruption as part of being a significant result, and that makes an experiment really beautiful, right? The kind of significance it had in revising beliefs, opening conversation, and reconsidering fundamental assumptions that are being made. If an experiment can do something like that, that also should be considered as part of being significant and well made for purpose.